Lieutenant Sarah Martinez stepped off the military transport plane at Camp Falcon, her boots hitting the dusty ground of the forward operating base in Afghanistan. The scorching sun beat down mercilessly as she adjusted her combat uniform and shouldered her gear. Around her, soldiers moved with practiced efficiency, their faces weathered by months of deployment. Sarah had been looking forward to this assignment for weeks. After spending 2 years working intelligence operations from a desk at the Pentagon, she was finally getting her chance to serve in the field. Her commanding officers had specifically requested her expertise in counterterrorism analysis, and she was eager to prove herself worthy of their confidence. As she made her way toward the base headquarters, Sarah couldn't help but notice the curious stares from other soldiers. Being one of the few women on the base was nothing new to her, but she had learned long ago to let her work speak for itself rather than waste energy on proving her worth to skeptics. The base commander, Major General Thompson, had arranged for her to meet with the local intelligence team that afternoon. Sarah spent the morning getting settled into her temporary quarters and reviewing the classified briefings she had brought with her. The situation in this particular region was more complex than most people realized, and her specialized knowledge would be crucial in identifying emerging threats. Colonel James Brennan ran the day-to-day operations at Camp Falcon with an iron fist. He was a career military man who had worked his way up through the ranks over 25 years of service. His reputation for being tough but fair had earned him the respect of most soldiers under his command, though some found his old-school approach intimidating. That afternoon, Colonel Brennan was walking through the communications center when he spotted Sarah reviewing satellite imagery with one of the intelligence analysts. He had heard that a new intelligence officer was arriving, but he hadn't been given many details about their background or experience level. "Excuse me, Lieutenant," Colonel Brennan interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "I don't believe we've been introduced. I'm Colonel Brennan, and I run operations here at Camp Falcon." Sarah looked up from her work and stood to attention. "Lieutenant Martinez, sir. I just arrived this morning to assist with intelligence analysis." Colonel Brennan looked her up and down with barely concealed skepticism. "Intelligence analysis? Huh? How long have you been in the service?" "Lieutenant. 8 years, sir," Sarah replied respectfully, though she could sense where this conversation was heading. "8 years," the colonel repeated, his tone suggesting he found this less than impressive. "And how much of that time have you spent in actual combat zones?" "This is my first deployment to a forward operating base, sir, but I've been working on counterterrorism intelligence for the past several years." Colonel Brennan let out a short laugh that made several nearby soldiers look up from their work. "So you're fresh out of your comfortable office job and think you're ready to play with the big boys? Is that it?" Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, but she maintained her professional composure. "I'm here to do whatever job needs to be done, sir." Created. "Well, let me give you some free advice, Lieutenant," Colonel Brennan said, his voice loud enough for half the communications center to hear. "This isn't some classroom exercise or computer simulation. Out here, people's lives depend on getting things right the first time. Maybe you should stick to filing reports and leave the real analysis to the experienced soldiers." The room had gone quiet, and Sarah could feel the eyes of a dozen soldiers watching the exchange. She knew that how she handled this moment would set the tone for her entire deployment. "I understand the gravity of the situation, sir," she said evenly. "I wouldn't be here if my superiors didn't believe I was qualified for the assignment." Colonel Brennan waved dismissively. "Your superiors probably needed to fill a quota. Look, I'm sure you mean well, but intelligence work in a combat zone requires a certain level of experience and instinct that you just can't learn from a textbook." One of the senior sergeants in the room shifted uncomfortably, clearly sensing that the colonel was pushing too hard. But Brennan seemed oblivious to the growing tension. "Tell you what," the colonel continued, his tone becoming more condescending. "Why don't you start by organizing our filing system? Make sure all the reports are properly categorized and dated. That seems more suited to your skill level." Sarah's jaw tightened, but she nodded curtly. "If that's what you think would be most helpful, sir." "Good. And Lieutenant?" Colonel Brennan added as he turned to leave. Try not to get in the way of the real soldiers while you're here. We've got important work to do." After the colonel left, the communications center slowly returned to its normal level of activity, though Sarah could still feel occasional glances in her direction. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who had been working at the computer next to hers, leaned over quietly. "Don't take it too personally," he said in a low voice. "The colonel's been under a lot of pressure lately. 3 different intelligence reports have come back with conflicting information, and he's frustrated that we can't get a clear picture of what's happening in the surrounding villages." Sarah nodded gratefully for the sergeant's kindness. But inside, she was burning with determination. She had dealt with dismissive colleagues before, but never quite so publicly or harshly. The colonel clearly had no idea who he was dealing with, and she was going to make sure her work proved him wrong. Over the next several days, Sarah threw herself into her assignment with single-minded focus. While she did organize the filing system as requested, she also began conducting her own analysis of the intelligence reports that had been frustrating the colonel. Using techniques she had developed during her time at the Pentagon, she started to identify patterns that the base's current analysts had missed. The key breakthrough came when she realized that the conflicting reports were actually describing the same events from different perspectives. By cross-referencing timestamps and geographic coordinates, she was able to piece together a much clearer picture of insurgent movement in the area. Colonel Brennan, meanwhile, continued to treat her with barely concealed disdain whenever their paths crossed. He would make snide comments about desk jockeys and book-smart soldiers who didn't understand real military work. Each interaction only strengthened Sarah's resolve to prove her worth through her performance. On Thursday morning, Sarah requested a meeting with the intelligence team to present her preliminary findings. She had prepared a detailed briefing that connected several previously unexplained incidents and identified a possible pattern of insurgent activity. Word of the meeting reached Colonel Brennan, who decided to attend out of curiosity. He arrived a few minutes late, taking a seat in the back of the room, with his arms crossed and a skeptical expression on his face. "I've been reviewing our recent intelligence reports," Sarah began, her voice steady and professional despite the colonel's intimidating presence. "I believe we've been looking at the data incorrectly, which has led to some confusion about insurgent movements in Sectors 7 and 12. She began walking through her analysis, using maps and charts to illustrate her points. As she spoke, the other intelligence officers leaned forward with growing interest. Even Colonel Brennan found himself paying attention despite his initial skepticism. "The reports we received from village elders in Sector 7 seemed to contradict the surveillance data from Sector 12, Sarah continued. "But when we account for the insurgents' likely route between these locations and adjust for the time delays in information gathering, everything starts to make sense." Major Stevens, the senior intelligence officer, studied Sarah's charts carefully. "This is impressive work, Lieutenant. How long did this analysis take you?" "About 3 days of detailed review," Sarah replied. "I think if we deploy surveillance assets to these 3 locations," she pointed to specific coordinates on the map, "we'll be able to confirm the pattern and potentially intercept the next movement." Colonel Brennan remained silent during the question-and-answer session that followed, but Sarah noticed that he was taking notes and studying her charts intently. She had clearly presented something that demanded serious consideration, regardless of his personal opinion of her qualifications. After the meeting, several officers approached Sarah to discuss her findings in more detail. The positive response from experienced field personnel gave her confidence that her analysis was sound, even if Colonel Brennan remained unconvinced. That evening, Sarah was reviewing additional intelligence reports when Staff Sergeant Rodriguez approached her workstation again. "Lieutenant, I just wanted to let you know that your briefing today has people talking," he said quietly. "Major Stevens has already forwarded your analysis to Division Headquarters for review." Sarah looked up from her computer screen. "That's good to hear, Sergeant. Do you think the recommendations have a chance of being implemented?" R. Life U5. "More than a chance," Rodriguez replied. "Major Stevens has been trying to figure out the insurgent pattern for weeks. Your analysis is the first thing that's made sense of all the conflicting data we've been receiving." As Sarah prepared for bed that night, she felt a sense of cautious optimism. She had managed to contribute something meaningful, despite Colonel Brennan's attempts to sideline her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But she was beginning to feel like she belonged at Camp Falcon. What she didn't yet know was that her analysis would soon prove far more valuable than anyone had imagined, and that Colonel Brennan's opinion of her was about to change dramatically. The insurgents were indeed following the pattern she had identified. And within days, her work would play a crucial role in saving lives and completing a critical mission. The stage was set for Sarah to demonstrate that sometimes the most important qualifications for military service couldn't be measured by years of field experience or the volume of one's voice during briefings. The alarm sounded at 0430 hours, jolting everyone at Camp Falcon awake. Sarah rolled out of her bunk and quickly dressed, her heart racing as she heard the urgent voices of soldiers moving through the barracks. Emergency alerts at this hour usually meant only one thing: immediate danger. In the communications center, chaos reigned as reports flooded in from multiple sources. A patrol unit had been ambushed while conducting a routine reconnaissance mission in Sector 12. 3 soldiers were wounded, and the entire squad was pinned down by insurgent forces in a location that perfectly matched Sarah's predicted pattern. Colonel Brennan arrived at the command center within minutes, his uniform hastily thrown on but his demeanor instantly focused and professional. Despite his earlier dismissiveness toward Sarah, he was an experienced combat commander who understood the gravity of the situation. "What's our current status?" he barked at Major Stevens, who was coordinating the response effort. "Bravo Squad is trapped approximately 2 clicks east of Checkpoint Delta," Stevens reported. "They've taken casualties and are requesting immediate extraction, but the insurgents have them surrounded on 3 sides." Sarah stood at her workstation, watching the tactical display as red icons marked enemy positions and blue markers showed the location of the trapped patrol. Her stomach dropped as she realized that this was exactly the scenario her analysis had predicted. But they were reacting to it instead of preventing it. "Sir," she called out, her voice cutting through the noise of radio chatter and urgent conversations. "I believe I can help." Seen. Colonel Brennan turned toward her, his expression a mixture of stress and irritation. "Lieutenant, this is not the time for academic theories. We need practical solutions. With respect, sir." "This situation is unfolding exactly as my analysis predicted," Sarah replied firmly. "I've been studying insurgent movement patterns in this area, and I think I know where they're going to retreat when we mount our rescue operation." Major Stevens looked up from his radio. "What are you suggesting, Lieutenant?" Sarah moved quickly to the large tactical map on the wall, pointing to several locations she had marked during her previous analysis. The insurgents have been using this network of caves and abandoned buildings as staging areas. Based on their previous patterns, when they come under pressure from our response team, they'll fall back to this position here. She indicated a point on the map about 3 kilometers from the ambush site. Colonel Brennan shook his head dismissively. "We don't have time for guesswork, Lieutenant. Our people are taking fire right now." "It's not guesswork, sir," Sarah insisted, pulling out the detailed charts she had prepared. "Look at the pattern from the last 6 incidents. Every time insurgent forces have engaged our patrols in this sector, they've used the same retreat route when faced with superior numbers." Captain Williams, who commanded the base's quick reaction force, studied Sarah's charts while strapping on his tactical gear. "This could work, sir. If she's right about their retreat pattern, we could position a blocking force here while the main rescue team approaches from the south." Colonel Brennan hesitated, clearly torn between his skepticism of Sarah's experience and the desperate need for any tactical advantage. Radio reports from the trapped patrol were becoming increasingly urgent, with ammunition running low and enemy forces apparently preparing for a final assault. "Sir," Sarah pressed, "I've been tracking this specific insurgent cell for 3 days. They're disciplined and well-organized, but they stick to proven routes and tactics. If we can anticipate their movement, we can turn their own strategy against them." Major Stevens was nodding as he reviewed Sarah's analysis. "Colonel, her predictions about insurgent activity in Sector 7 were completely accurate. Division headquarters validated her analysis yesterday." The weight of command pressed heavily on Colonel Brennan's shoulders as he stared at the tactical display. Every minute of delay potentially cost lives. but committing his forces to the wrong strategy could make the situation even worse. "All right, Lieutenant," he said finally, his voice grim but decisive. "You've got 5 minutes to explain your recommendation to Captain Williams. If he thinks it's viable, we'll implement it." Sarah quickly briefed the captain on her analysis, showing him satellite imagery and explaining the insurgents' likely escape routes. Williams asked several pointed questions about timing and enemy capabilities, all of which Sarah answered with confidence based on her detailed study of previous incidents. "I think she's right, Colonel," Williams concluded. "It's our best shot at preventing the insurgents from escaping and potentially saving our people in the process." Colonel Brennan nodded curtly. "Make it happen." The rescue operation launched with precision that would have made any military academy proud. Captain Williams led the main assault team in a direct approach to relieve the trapped patrol, while a smaller blocking force positioned themselves along Sarah's predicted retreat route. Sarah remained in the communications center, monitoring radio traffic and tracking the movement of all friendly forces on the tactical display. She felt the weight of responsibility heavily as she watched blue icons representing real soldiers moving into positions based entirely on her analysis. The radio crackled with Captain Williams' voice. "Contact. We have visual on Bravo Squad's position. Moving in to provide support." Gunfire echoed across the desert as the rescue team engaged the insurgent forces. For tense minutes, the outcome remained uncertain as both sides exchanged fire across the rocky terrain that provided natural defensive positions. Then came the report Sarah had been both hoping for and dreading. "Enemy forces are falling back to the northeast. I say again, insurgents are retreating northeast." Colonel Brennan looked directly at Sarah as the radio transmission confirmed that the insurgents were moving exactly where she had predicted. Her analysis hadn't just been correct, it had been precise enough to allow them to plan a successful interdiction. "Blocking team, this is command," Major Stevens transmitted. "Enemy forces are approaching your position as predicted. Execute Phase 2. The careful coordination paid off perfectly. Caught between the pursuing rescue team and the blocking force, the insurgent fighters found themselves trapped in exactly the same situation they had created for the patrol. Without their escape route, they were forced to surrender rather than face annihilation. Within 2 hours, all members of Bravo Squad had been successfully evacuated to the base medical facility. 2 soldiers required surgery for their wounds, but all were expected to make full recoveries. More importantly, the insurgent cell that had been responsible for multiple attacks in the region had been captured intact. As the command center returned to normal operations, Colonel Brennan approached Sarah's workstation. She was updating her files with information from the morning's operation, cross-referencing the actual enemy movements with her predictions to refine her analytical model. "Lieutenant," he said quietly, his tone completely different from their previous interactions. "I owe you an apology." Sarah looked up from her computer, surprised by the colonel's changed demeanor. "Sir? Your analysis was spot on," Brennan continued. "Not only did you predict where the insurgents would be, but your tactical recommendations probably saved lives today. I was wrong to dismiss your capabilities based on your limited field experience." "Thank you, sir," Sarah replied professionally. "I'm just glad we were able to bring everyone home safely." Colonel Brennan nodded, but his expression remained serious. "I've been in the military for 25 years, and I pride myself on recognizing talent when I see it. I let my preconceptions cloud my judgment, and that was a failure of leadership on my part." The admission clearly cost him something, and Sarah could see that he was genuinely troubled by his earlier behavior. "We all have things to learn, sir. I certainly learned a lot about field operations today." "Yes, well." The colonel cleared his throat awkwardly. "Major Stevens is preparing a full report on this operation for division headquarters. Your analysis will be prominently featured, and I'll be recommending you for commendation." Sarah felt a surge of pride, but she kept her expression modest. "I appreciate that, sir." "There's something else," Colonel Brennan added, lowering his voice. "I received a classified communication this morning that I think you should know about. Your security clearance should cover it. He handed her a sealed envelope marked with the highest levels of military classification. Sarah's eyes widened as she recognized the insignia and coding that indicated the message had come from the very highest levels of military command. "Sir, I think there might be some mistake," she said, looking at the clearance level required to read the document. "I don't think I have the authorization for this level of classified information." Colonel Brennan's expression was unreadable. "Trust me, Lieutenant. You have the clearance." As Sarah opened the envelope with trembling hands, she had no idea that her entire world was about to change. The document would not only explain why she had been specifically requested for this assignment, but also reveal why Colonel Brennan's dismissive treatment had been far more inappropriate than either of them had realized. The morning's successful operation had proven her analytical capabilities beyond any doubt, but the contents of that classified envelope would soon show that her qualifications for being at Camp Falcon went far beyond intelligence analysis. Colonel Brennan was about to discover that his assumptions about the young lieutenant had been wrong in ways he could never have imagined. Sarah stared at the document in her hands, reading it twice before the full implications began to sink in. The official letterhead at the top bore the seal of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the signature at the bottom belonged to General Patricia Hayes, the highest-ranking woman in the United States military. The document was brief, but its contents were explosive. It confirmed Sarah's temporary assignment to Camp Falcon, but more importantly, it revealed information about her background that had been classified at the highest levels. According to the orders, Lieutenant Sarah Martinez was not just another intelligence analyst. She was the daughter of General Maria Martinez, the newly appointed Deputy Director of the Defense Intelligence Agency. But that wasn't the most shocking revelation. The document also contained a second piece of information that made Sarah's hands shake as she read it. Effective immediately upon completion of her field assignment, she was to be promoted to the rank of Major and transferred to a position on the Joint Chiefs of Staff's Strategic Planning Committee. Colonel Brennan watched her face carefully as she processed the information. "I received that communication yesterday morning," he said quietly. "Before our first meeting." Sarah looked up at him, understanding dawning in her eyes. "You knew who I was when I treated you like an incompetent rookie." "Yes," Brennan finished, his face grave. "The truth is, Lieutenant, your assignment here wasn't random. General Hayes specifically requested that you be given field experience before your promotion to Major. She wanted you to understand combat operations from the ground level." The implications of what he was saying hit Sarah like a physical blow. "My mother arranged this assignment?" "Not exactly," Colonel Brennan clarified. "According to the briefing materials I received after our unfortunate first meeting, you specifically requested field experience before accepting the promotion. You wanted to earn your advancement through merit, not family connections." Sarah set the document down carefully, her mind racing through everything that had happened over the past week. "So my mother could have told you who I was, but she chose not to. General Martinez believed that revealing your family connection would compromise the purpose of your assignment," Brennan explained. "You wanted to prove yourself as a soldier, not as a general's daughter." The irony of the situation wasn't lost on either of them. Sarah had wanted to avoid special treatment because of her family background. But Colonel Brennan's ignorance of that background had led him to treat her far worse than he would have treated any other junior officer. "Sir, I need to ask you something directly," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the emotional turmoil she was feeling. "If you had known from the beginning who my mother was, would you have treated me differently?" Colonel Brennan was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with his answer. "Honestly? Yes, I probably would have. And that's exactly why your mother and General Hayes were right not to tell me." He sat down across from her, his expression thoughtful. "You've shown more tactical insight and analytical skill in 1 week than some officers develop in years of service. Your recommendations saved lives today. That achievement belongs to you, not to your family name." Sarah appreciated his honesty, but she was still grappling with the complexity of her situation. "What happens now? Do I tell the other soldiers who I really am? That's entirely up to you, Brennan replied. Your assignment here officially ends in 2 weeks. You can maintain your cover identity until then, or you can reveal the truth. Either way, you've already proven yourself as far as I'm concerned. Before Sarah could respond, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez appeared in the doorway of the communications center. Excuse me, Colonel, but we just received an urgent transmission from Division Headquarters. They're requesting an immediate video conference with Lieutenant Martinez. Colonel Brennan and Sarah exchanged glances. Patch it through to the secure conference room, Brennan instructed. And, Sergeant? This conversation is classified at the highest level. Minutes later, Sarah found herself seated at a conference table facing a large video screen that displayed the Pentagon's Strategic Command Center. General Patricia Hayes appeared on screen, her 4-star insignia clearly visible on her uniform. Lieutenant Martinez, General Hayes began, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to commanding armies. I understand you've had quite an eventful week. Yes, ma'am, Sarah replied, snapping to attention despite being seated. Colonel Brennan, the general continued, addressing him directly. I've reviewed your report on this morning's operation. Your recommendation for Lieutenant Martinez's commendation has been approved and expedited. Colonel Brennan straightened in his chair. Thank you, General. The lieutenant's analysis was instrumental in the mission's success. General Hayes nodded approvingly. Which brings me to the reason for this call. Lieutenant Martinez, your field assignment has been accelerated due to your exceptional performance. You're being recalled to Washington immediately for your promotion ceremony and briefing on your new position. Sarah felt a mixture of pride and disappointment. She had just begun to feel like she belonged at Camp Falcon, and the idea of leaving so soon felt like unfinished business. Ma'am, if I may, Sarah said carefully. I believe there's still valuable work to be done here. The intelligence network I've been mapping could provide significant strategic advantage if given more time to develop. General Hayes smiled slightly. Spoken like a true intelligence officer. However, your insights from this assignment will be far more valuable in your new role coordinating multi-theater operations. You'll be applying the lessons you've learned here to a much broader scope. Colonel Brennan leaned forward. General, if you don't mind me asking, what will the lieutenant's new position entail? Major Martinez, General Hayes corrected with emphasis, will be serving as Strategic Intelligence Coordinator for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. She'll be responsible for analyzing threat patterns across all active theaters and coordinating intelligence sharing between branches of service. The weight of what she was hearing began to settle on Sarah's shoulders. She was being offered one of the most influential intelligence positions in the entire military, with responsibilities that would affect operations worldwide. General, Sarah said quietly, I'm honored by the opportunity, but I want to make sure I'm accepting this position for the right reasons. I don't want anyone to think my advancement is based on family connections rather than merit. General Hayes' expression became serious. Major Martinez, let me be very clear about something. Your mother had no influence on this decision. In fact, she specifically requested that she be excluded from any discussions about your career advancement to avoid any appearance of favoritism. She paused, allowing that information to sink in before continuing. Your selection for this position is based entirely on your analytical capabilities, your performance at the Pentagon, and now your demonstrated effectiveness in field conditions. Colonel Brennan's assessment of your work has only confirmed what we already knew about your potential. Colonel Brennan nodded emphatically. General, I can personally attest that Major Martinez earned every bit of recognition she's receiving. Her tactical analysis prevented a potential disaster and led to the capture of an entire insurgent cell. Which brings us to another important point. General Hayes continued. Major Martinez, your analytical techniques have attracted attention at the highest levels. We want you to develop a training program that can be implemented across all intelligence units to improve pattern recognition and threat assessment. Sarah realized that her career was taking a dramatic turn that would affect not just her own future, but potentially the effectiveness of military intelligence operations throughout the armed forces. I accept the position, ma'am, she said formally. When do you need me in Washington? Your transport leaves Camp Falcon at 0600 tomorrow, General Hayes replied, which gives you the rest of today to complete your handover and say your goodbyes. After the video conference ended, Sarah and Colonel Brennan sat in silence for several minutes, both processing the dramatic changes that had just been announced. You know, Brennan said finally, I owe you more than just an apology. I owe you a debt of gratitude. Sarah looked at him questioningly. You could have revealed your family connections at any point during that first week, he explained. One word about your mother being General Martinez, and I would have treated you completely differently. But you chose to prove yourself through your work, instead. He stood up and extended his hand. It's been an honor serving with you, Major Martinez. I have no doubt that you'll excel in your new position. Sarah shook his hand firmly. Thank you, Colonel. And thank you for giving me the chance to prove what I could do, even if it took a while for you to see it. As news of Sarah's true identity and promotion spread through Camp Falcon, the reaction from her fellow soldiers was overwhelmingly positive. Rather than feeling deceived, most expressed admiration for her choice to serve without revealing her family connections. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez approached her as she was packing her gear that evening. Ma'am, I just wanted to say that it's been an honor working with you. You showed all of us that it doesn't matter where you come from or who your family is. What matters is what you do when it counts. That night, as Sarah prepared for her departure, she reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought her to this point. She had come to Camp Falcon seeking to prove herself as a soldier, but she was leaving with something far more valuable: the knowledge that she had earned her advancement through merit and dedication. Colonel Brennan's initial mockery had stung, but it had also motivated her to exceed every expectation. In trying to diminish her, he had inadvertently pushed her to demonstrate capabilities that might have remained hidden in a more comfortable assignment. As her transport plane lifted off from Camp Falcon the next morning, Sarah looked down at the base where she had faced her greatest professional challenge and achieved her most significant victory. She was no longer just General Martinez's daughter or a promising intelligence analyst. She was Major Sarah Martinez, a proven leader who had earned her rank through courage, skill, and determination. Colonel Brennan stood on the flight line watching the plane disappear into the distance, knowing that he had just witnessed the departure of one of the most remarkable officers he had ever encountered. His initial misjudgment would serve as a permanent reminder that true military excellence could come from the most unexpected sources, and that the most dangerous assumption any leader could make was thinking they could judge a soldier's worth by anything other than their actions when it mattered most.